to another episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. I am your co-host today, AJ Alonso, joined by my other illustrious co-host, Alex Ellison. Alex, how are you today?
I'm good. I got to watch them put a gate on the front of my apartment building on my window this morning. Very loud, but I think it's mostly done. So, it'll be calm and peaceful from here on out.
We hear jackhammering or sawing during the middle of this podcast, I know it's your fault. Good to know. We've got a fantastic guest with us today, Maria Bross. She is the Director of Sales Development over at revenue.io. Maria, how are you?
Good. I'm super excited to be here today.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. I'm looking forward to digging into the topic that we have set up for you today. It's around the SDR model and sort of its viability in today's modern sales environment. Before we dig into the meat of the conversation and get your take on it, let the audience know a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What does revenue.io do? Give us the Maria 101.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. And I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation. I know we're all passionate about SDR, so really appreciate the opportunity. But yeah, just a little bit about me. I've been in sales past decade now, which makes me feel really old, but in the past decade, it's changed a lot in the past decade. But started as an SDR and an AE, worked for various tech companies, both publicly traded and startup and everywhere in between, and sucked at sales, like completely sucked. And so I'm pretty transparent about that fact. Like sales and things did not come naturally to me, but it is honestly like the biggest blessing for me because it really kickstarted a love of learning and what my actual career path is and what I'm so passionate about and grateful for because I get to meet really cool people like you guys all the time is sales enablement and productivity and adult learning and those types of topics, which led me to sales enablement and really made that transition after I started to see some really great results from coaching, from training, from trying to learn from people a lot smarter and better at sales than me. And yes, it was reflected. I figured out, oh wow, sales can be learned. I didn't know this. This is cool. And so that's kind of where that all started from. And then it's it's people that are not naturally good at this don't have to give up on this career because obviously it can be very, very lucrative without the debt of like a surgeon has or, someone, a doctor that's going to getting advanced education. So, really, really passionate about what I do, specifically the SDR function. So I did sales enablement, built an onboarding program from the ground up and got really interested in adult learning and how information sticks and how new behaviors are adopted and wanted to build my own team. And so it started with the account executive team, like a small group. And I'm I'm really passionate about the pipeline building in the first part of the sales process. If I could be a lifelong SDR, I probably would because I just love cold calling and I'm a nut like that. But that's really where it comes in. And so I transitioned into the SDR function at revenue.io to take on the team and really fine tune what they're doing and had such a great experience so far with this SDR group. Hired a lot of reps and really started to build out the program even more using our own technology, which is like a really unique, exciting scenario, but was so passionate about coming to Revenue is because it's really I rallied around the problems that Revenue helps solve and the teams and the people that they're serving, right? So I don't know if you're not familiar with Revenue. We work with sales teams of various sizes, revenue teams really, CS to marketing, sales, SDR functions to help drive productivity, help them to be more successful, coaching on the phones, seeing the data, finding what actually works in their process so that it can be repeated. And I get really excited about that and using our own technology every single day, learning different things and strategies.
That's awesome. I love you've painted a very large, broad picture of who you are, what you do, which is great. So, and there are aspects.
This is my life story.
I was born in a log cabin in 1812. But it's really cool that,
Literally.
first of all, I find it incredibly refreshing that you can fully admit that when you first started in sales, you sucked. I'm one of those people as well, where like jumping into it as an SDR, for me, it was in 2013. There wasn't a whole lot of like enablement that happened back then. There weren't a lot of like really well built training programs. There weren't a lot of, I
Yeah.
didn't even use a CRM when I first started. Like I was on Google
Yeah.
Sheets. So there's a lot today that reps can be thankful for in terms of where they're starting
Mhm.
and sort of how they're being supported that, a decade ago people weren't getting. And it's difficult to succeed in that environment. So for you, I think it like
Mhm.
paints a really good picture of like how you got to where you are now, because you were put into a situation where, correct me if I'm wrong, you look at it and you're like, there has to be a better way, right? Like there's there's got to be something that we can do organizationally to support these reps in a way where they can succeed, rather than kind of just go with the classic sink or swim type model that a lot of organizations
Yeah.
take. And I know you're really passionate about sort of, like you were talking about, building out these training programs, really making the SDR function sustainable in a way where you can come in with essentially no experience and be in a position where you can succeed, whereas in the past maybe that wasn't the case.
Spot on. I mean, really like spot on. I think, back when we started in those days, and luckily at the time, I had a really great manager. I loved the team that I started, and I'm still grateful for that opportunity because they took a chance on like a college kid that I was just like, oh yeah, we'll just try this because
Why not?
this is, yeah, I'd like to get a paycheck, so this sounds good. And and they took a chance on me, and I sucked. And I did have great resources. But you're right, like back then it was like a dusty old Dale Carnegie book of like how to win friends and influence people, and then hopefully you had like a good manager that like could be like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, be like me, say what I say, and maybe you get some results there. But yeah, for those people that doesn't come naturally to, you're like had an uphill battle there because there wasn't the podcast like you guys have today that and all of like the great content that's out there to help reps be successful. And now it's almost the opposite problem. It's like, okay, how do I like curate and like figure out what to use? Like we can get into this cycle of, and I know I do it. I'm guilty of it, of just like consuming a bunch of content and listening to podcasts and reading different books and things, and then just like not testing any of them out because like learning feels good.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's kind of what I try to do, is just like slow down a little bit and like take one tactic and test it out. But yeah, it's a completely different world, but it's really exciting to evolve and like adapt to how sales has changed. And yeah, a lot more opportunity for folks who the not naturally good at salesers like us out there because hopefully like programs like this and tools like at Revenue, like what we sell, are enabling that to happen and giving them a chance when they maybe wouldn't have.
Yeah, I really like that. And to add my own little, excuse me, own color to it. When I started as an SDR, it was they had a excuse me, something in my throat. We
So
had like
choked
a
up
Good.
thinking about
yeah,
this.
I'm just so emotional. We had a training schedule that like was laid out. So like you're doing this for an hour, this for an hour. But then when I got there, they were like, "Oh, you're going to work with this client here," and they just gave me to the like senior SDR on that team, and we're like, "He can do all the training." And
Oh,
I was lucky enough that like he knew how to train and he was a really good SDR, but the odds of that happening, like it's definitely all luck, right? You don't know what they actually know going in. So you go in, you're like, all right, you try and absorb everything they tell you, but it might be terrible
mm.
advice, right? You don't really know that. So, um, yeah, to sort of spin
Gamble.
that towards exactly. So to sort of spin that towards what you were saying, like now there's so much out there that you can have a similar problem, right? Where you read this blog and listen to this podcast and this video, and you don't know, they could be telling you completely opposite things. And how are you supposed to know, which piece of advice is good advice versus bad advice? Do you have any skills that you've picked up through all this learning to be able to tell, like, what should I listen to and what should I maybe be a little bit more skeptical about when you're going through all these resources?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because there's so much out there. There's so much good out there. And I think just what you said, to be skeptical of everything and also see like number one, is this ethical? Do I feel comfortable? Because there's a lot of just like weird, unethical tactics out there too,
Yeah.
like that are deceptive, and so like that's probably the first question you should ask yourself about what you're reading or listening to. And then the second piece of that is just like, does this feel authentic to who I am? Because it could be good advice, but it's just might not be good advice for you. So I think that's worth taking into consideration. And then also, yeah, one thing that I'm also very skeptical of is like those posts that's like, hey, this is the one right way to do things. And that's not the case, because people see success using different tactics. So those are, I think those would be like the three things that I would advise on. And and then just like going from there, because there are some out there. I think that most of like the content that I see or LinkedIn posts are very like well-meaning, but and like really trying to help. But yeah, I think just being skeptical of everything, being skeptical of what your manager tells you to do too, and going from there, like you should be able to question that as well.
Yeah, I think that is what really separates an SDR who they get called like order takers, individuals who you put a script in front of them, you give them a list of names, and their job is to go book meetings. And that's what they'll do, but they won't really deviate from that a lot. They kind of ingest what they want to ingest. They spit out what that kind of spits out, and they listen to their manager. They listen to what they read on LinkedIn. They take it without a grain of salt, essentially, and just do it. And then there's like the subset of reps who have sort of that critical thinking, that self-awareness, that the capacity to look at something, like you said, ask themselves that question: is this authentic to me? Is this ethical? Do I see myself doing this? If I look at it from my lens versus the lens of the author, does it match up? I think one of the big things that I've seen recently that sort of is this phenomenon are cold call openers. There's a lot of discussion about like, oh, do I use a permission-based opener? Do I try something cute and sort of go in and try to like break the ice a little bit with like a joke? And a lot of times, from my perspective, I see reps who adopt something that works for somebody else, but it doesn't work for them because authentically that's just like not how they roll. One of the better ones that I've seen, I'll shout out Ronan Pessar over at Stylo. One of his openers is, hey, this is a cold call. Do you want to roll the dice? And for him, that's great because like the tonality that he uses and sort of how he approaches it, it's very authentic. It's very him. But for an SDR who isn't comfortable with that, if they say it, it's going to sound really awkward. And the person on the other end is going to be like, oh, like, no, I don't want to roll the dice. So then they write that off. It's a bad opener. But it's all about perspective, right? Like, use what you think is good, not what everyone tells you is good. I think that's amazing advice for you.
Yeah, no, I know Ronan too. Hey Ronan, if you're listening. Yeah, he's got great Ronan is one of the good ones that has great ideas. But yeah, I think that's so true of does this feel like me? Does this feel unnatural? And I think like a lot of things are going to feel unnatural at first, and will take some practice and things. But like, I'm not a funny person. Like, I realize my part in the joke making process is to be the laugher, not like the joke teller. So it's like that's where my value comes in, and I'm damn good at it. I really appreciate comedy, but like I just don't deliver it well. So like I don't really try to be funny in my cold calling, but like I love it when people do, and like that's who they are. So I think that's part of it, is like maybe be skeptical, test it out, get a good enough sample size and be like, does this feel like me? I feel like I just need to like fine tune this a little bit more, or this just completely not like something I would ever say. And also think about your prospects too. Like the person who's giving the advice, they could have a completely different ICP than you do, sell into a completely different industry or different sales cycle, right? And you have to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, valuable to get the insight and opinions from someone who isn't, a carbon copy of you selling into the same type of person with a similar message, but knowing that it's emulate, don't copy, right? Like see what they're doing and try to make it work for you. Don't just like copy, paste it and assume that it's going to work. I think a lot of that, and this kind of goes back to the meat of the conversation here in terms of like the viability of the SDR role in general, and sort of how training programs are built to support SDRs today. That copy paste mentality, sort of like seeing what works for other organizations, copying it and pasting it for your organization. Do you see a lot of that within sort of your role on the enablement side of things, in terms of like maybe companies even looking at what revenue.io is doing and trying to make it work for their organization, or companies in general just seeing what like a big name like Salesforce, for example, how they train their SDR function and trying to use it for their team? Like, it's not apples to apples. It's not going to work. Talk about any sort of experience you have with that, how you've kind of built out the training operation at revenue.io, what you built it off of, and sort of how you got the foundation sort of laid for that.
Sure. Okay. So this has been like quite the evolution, because the way that I'm training reps now, I've got a rep starting on Monday, which I'm really excited about. And the way that and also I have a sales enablement leader too, who is fantastic. So I'm really excited to start that whole process with him, get her up to speed quickly. So I'm excited to see how like the flavor that he brings to it. But yes, the process has really changed since, how many years ago has it been now? Probably 4 years ago at Boomtown, when I built the program, because I was just kind of going off of like, okay, what did I need? Like how, like working backwards from like what the goals are, like, and pulling the team too, asking them like, what do you wish that you learned in onboarding? What didn't you cover? What was most helpful? What was not helpful? And what did we spend too much time on or too little time on? So I think that's a great place to start, at least, is just like some discovery within your own organization, talking to different teams, seeing what exists, like resources that are out there, what needs updating. And I've very much changed the way that I approach this. At first, for my first onboarding class, I was like, all right, I got this. Like we're excited to talk product and passionate about what we do. So like we went into bits and bytes and product specific things and demos, and this is our elevator pitch and all of that good stuff, right? That we get jazzed about as sellers. But what I neglected to do and not spend enough time on was like the personas, right? Like the people that we're selling to. Like, what do they care about? How do they talk about these problems? What's the status quo look like? What's the impact if they don't change from the status quo? How are we helping them approach these challenges differently? Like, what can we teach them? And what are some good like stories of these outcomes of what our rockstar clients are doing differently? And so now I like the bulk of our training, and hopefully Spencer's like agrees with me, like when we talk about onboarding our new rep, is going to be based on that, because I think like that's such a great foundation for having some really good organic conversations that don't have to be scripted. Is like that understanding of the other person's world. I think it was like the LinkedIn State of Sales report that had like the number one quality that buyers look for in sellers is like listening and an understanding of their world. And so the more that we can display that as SDRs on calls, the better, the more credibility that we're going to bring, the more rapport and relationship we're going to have with our prospects. And it shouldn't be rocket science to do. It's not just like, it shouldn't be like, oh, I just need 10 years selling into this market to get an understanding. No, like we should be able to give you like Spark Notes, cheat codes to that and onboarding to prepare you for those conversations. And so I've shifted a lot. Like we cover products obviously, but it's more so, okay, like what is it? What does it impact? And like what more so of like, what are our prospects doing differently? And like, how does this make them more awesome at their job or address some really frustrating thing that's a part of their day? And so that sort of context or lens to look under, like when you're talking through product, when inevitably you do, because you do need to talk about product. I think it should be under that, especially for the SDR team. They don't need to know the bits and bytes, right? If someone's interested in those like really specific question, like product tech questions, cool, they're interested. Let's get them over to the AE, right?
Yeah.
Like let's get the sales engineer in, like you've done your job, you got them interested if they're asking those questions. So yeah, so that's really long-winded, but I would say that that's shifted a lot. So that's number one. And then number two, it's all about frameworks. So like the process to get to your goal, because that's why we're all here, right? We're here to learn, we're here to grow and have fun and not hate our life like in our job. But it's also like we're here to make money. We're in sales. Like we're here for the money, for the business to make money, and then all the learning and relationships on the way. But so I think the other part of it is like process based. How are you going to structure your day working backwards from your goals? I think like that's a big takeaway I had. There's this book called Chasing Excellence. It's one of my like favorite books, leadership coaching books of all time. It's like, I promise you, I'm not part of like a CrossFit cult trying to like
affiliate
there's
link
so
for
many
anytime the book gets sold.
yeah, but this book is so powerful in that like the main message of it is, hey, we can't look at the scoreboard. We shouldn't be looking at our competitor next to us. We merely need to like have the plan to execute on and just like execute on what we've practiced. And so like that's very much the mentality like of a part of training too that you build to the program. It's like, okay, what are the inputs that you need to do to get to the outputs? Knowing your numbers, like, okay, this is what a good day looks like, even if I don't book a meeting. And also the framework, like I don't give scripts for our team. I don't tell them what to say because again, like their own tone, their own voice is so important. And they don't sound like me. We've got, Jeremy, who grew up in Chicago, that, he's not going to say things and talk about things the way that my like Southern sorority girl voice says, right? So I don't give them scripts. I give them frameworks of like, hey, this is what I believe to be the best way to accomplish this goal. This is the goal. And like test this out, make it your own. And then we chunk out the different parts of the call and practice it over and over and over again. And so that they're comfortable, right? So lots of different things. I could probably spend 5 hours on it, but I think it's all about, again, in summary, frameworks, understanding their persona and like where you all fit in. And then just knowing the process, like it's almost like going to the gym. You don't go to the gym and thinking about, oh, okay, I'm going to just work out today and check that box. No, like if you're on like a plan to reach some sort of goal, whether it's a weight loss goal or a, being able to bench press 500 pounds, whatever it is, like if you should have a plan when you go into the gym of I'm going to do this exercise, this many reps, and like, track your progress over time. And that's if you're serious about a goal, that's what you should do too. And as an SDR or an AE.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I kind of want to circle back because I think your point about the personas was really interesting in talking about how the three of us were trained as SDRs versus what they do now. And I feel like there's such a higher emphasis on focusing on the prospect, focusing on the buyer and what they want that just didn't exist before. I remember it was just like months of trial and error of talking to these, IT professionals, in my case, on the phone and having these really short conversations before I was able to figure out like, oh, they don't want any fluff. They don't want no pleasantries. They just want details. Like that was the persona. But in training, it was more about like, this is how you call people. This is how you log it in the CRM. So I love that you recognize that was going on when you started training people and were like, how do I adjust this to fit today's buyer and today's prospect, that really like they want to take more ownership of the process than it used to be, right? I call you, oh, you want it? Great. Let me set you up. Whereas nowadays, a lot of times they're coming through marketing channels, or even if they're not inbound, there's like some intent or something showing that they're interested, that they want to have that ownership of. So being able to reach out to those people and understand who they are as you do that is huge. And yeah, I wish it didn't take trial and error for me to figure that out personally.
Oh, we've all been there. We've all been there, Alex. I'm sure AJ has too. Like,
Can confirm.
Those were the dark ages. But but yeah, I think that's so important for us to like really have that strong understanding. And I just want to preach, like, it does not take 10 years to be able to do this. I'm sure there's, some woman or guy on your team that, it's been there forever and you're like, I could never know as much as them. You don't need to. You don't need to know as much as them. When you've been there 10 years, you'll have that, that expertise. But like, we can really prepare these reps with the information that they need on the call, with the context and the understanding of their buyers. We just, as sales leaders, or enablement leaders, we need to give them the Spark Notes version of that so that they can comfortably talk about, especially like the main frustration for each persona that you all help solve.
Yeah. um, going back to that, and something that you mentioned before that I think is so important is you can give reps the spark notes, but a lot of times, like even if companies have those good spark notes or like good tidbits to give during training weeks, um, they'll often do it for like a week or two and then kind of like put you out to pasture almost. And it's like, cool, like you understand everything, right? These are all of the things you should know what to say when you're talking to this specific persona. Like you can arm them all you want, but it takes repetition. It takes continued development after that for SDRs to really get it and just start getting in that groove and like working within the systems and processes that you build for replicable results. Talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how do you work sort of that continued coaching and that development into your enablement so that reps don't just get it once and then like hope they get it forever, but you keep reinforcing it?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question because that's the biggest problem, right? Especially like well-intentioned coaching, right? We need to do more coaching. Okay, great, but is it going to be adopted? Will it lead to results? Will it make an impact? We've got this really great training program. It's awesome. They're excited to get started getting on the phones. Sweet. Like, but does the training program look like what the managers are coaching to? Are those two connected? Right? I've learned that the hard way. I built this onboarding program and was like, okay, this is what I think good looks like. This is what I believe that they should know. But I didn't get the sales managers involved in that. And so there were like different perspectives on how things could naturally, like how things should get done and what good looks like. And so I think that's really, really important for those managers and like the frontline managers, leadership team. You don't have to have a formalized, like, we're challenger methodology or we're gap selling or whatever. You don't need to necessarily have that specifically, but you need to align on like what good looks like, what the standards are, and be on the same page with that across enablement and a management team so that you can consistently follow up on that training. And yeah, I think that's one piece that's so important. So you learn so much in training. Like there's a Gartner stat out there that 87% of new information is forgotten in the first 30 days after learning it, which is huge. And that's not considered in training and onboarding programs. And that's why it takes forever for reps to ramp. So I think if you can reduce that ramp period, you can reinforce that coaching, the training that you're getting on a consistent basis and make it very, very clear, like what those expectations are, what does good look like, and coach to those very specific things. That's when you start moving the needle. And even better too, like, right, I haven't been in like a direct individual contributor quota carrying role in 5 years probably now, right? I'm still cold calling. I want to stay sharp, but like it's changed, right? So a lot of I get nervous, or I've gotten nervous in previous roles about like, giving feedback off of hunches or building what I think good looks like just based on my experience, right? But I haven't been selling for 5 years. I haven't been in their shoes. And so I think that it's also really important to make those decisions based off the data and like what is actually working, what you're seeing. And unfortunately, like so many companies, that's just unknown, right? So it does have to go off of hunches. And you can't know everything based off the data, right? We're not robots, but I think it's a good starting place.
Yeah, you got to mix data and hunches together. Otherwise,
Yes.
There's just, if you do it just based on hunches or like gut feel, you're missing a large subset of like what actually works. And if you just do it based on data, then you don't have that human element, which is crucial in every aspect of sales. So I really like that idea that like on a leadership level, you probably know what's going to work, but like it'd be a lot better if you had some data to back yourself up rather than like, well, I kind of just know.
Yeah. Yeah, and to prioritize too what you're coaching against. Like one of the big things I'll look at is like call dispositions and like look at trends to see, oh wow, we had like a spike in a specific objection. Maybe we should do like a little like mini workshop on just addressing that one objection, and like I can listen to calls to see why is that objection happening. So I think I like geek out over data, and I know not everybody has to be that way, but I think that that's helpful at least to like prioritize the topics and also justify a framework for doing things.
Yeah, Yeah, that proactivity I think is super important, right? Like a lot of sales is reactive. If you don't go into the data and you don't notice those spikes in an objection that's difficult to handle, then it builds and builds and builds until it starts to really impact like pipeline revenue and sort of like your bottom of line metrics. Getting in front of it early and being able to address it with reps and start building within the frameworks that you have, some workshops and some additional, supplementary training around that can sort of nip it in the bud before it becomes a real problem. And I think that's super crucial. Something else that you mentioned in there that I thought was really interesting, and I want to see if you had other resources around there, is like you talk about building these frameworks and sort of like helping reps go, okay, this is, the system or process we have for continued coaching and onboarding. Obviously, you've developed a lot of internal material to help out with that and sort of run these workshops. But do you ever pull in outside material in, like working with communities or podcasts or books, or like kind of bringing in outer materials into your development framework so that reps can upskill sort of like outside of what you've built and give them other resources to do that? And what are they?
Yeah, for sure. So that is absolutely like encouraged, right? I have a limited, I'm one person and one way of selling. I pull in, I would say like, I'll have like an idea for something or change something up, and my reps will be like, oh, this is so great. This is really working. Like, how do you come up with it? And I'm like, I'm curating things from Josh Braun and Samantha McKenna and Gap Selling. And like, this is not my brainchild. I'm just like making a Frankenstein of sales trainers, really great advice, right? Or in like 30 Minutes Presence Club, like your podcast, like listening to these different resources and kind of hodgepodging together of what I believe to be the best way. And also like evolving that after listening to a bunch of calls. Like there's an example just this past week, I realized from the data, like we were getting a lot of prospecting research fruitful as the call disposition. And I'm like, what the hell does this mean? Why are they marking that? Like, what does this mean? And I'm looking at the data, and it's like, all of these are like 10 plus minute calls of my team. And I'm like, what the hell are they talking about for 10 minutes on a cold call? Like these, and when I say cold call, I mean like they go in there with a lot of conviction. They know why they're calling them. I define cold call as just like an unplanned, unexpected call. Yeah. So I'm like, what are they doing keeping them on the phone for 10 minutes? And like most sales leaders, I think, would be like, oh, this is great. They're having like long conversations with our buyers. Not me. I started listening to some of these calls, and they're great, but they sounded like discovery calls, right? And so then I was like, ooh, okay, we shouldn't make these discovery calls. They're, driving their kid to the dentist, or they're, in the middle of like pulling a Excel doc of something. They're not like really, we haven't earned the right to ask them some of these discovery questions of how they're getting the job done. So from there, I was like, ooh, we should ask for the meeting earlier, like as soon as we think that it would be a good use of their time. And we should change up a little bit of our framework of I thought was like the best framework, where instead of like asking about a challenge, like painting this idea of like these frustrating scenarios of like, hey, this trigger event happened, and that's why I'm calling you. Could I steal a minute to ask you a quick question? And most times they say yes. And then it's like, all right, that's going to sound a little bit off base, but humor me for a second. Have you ever been in the scenario where, and then that scenario could ideally like match up with whatever trigger for outreach. And anyway, so if they agree to that scenario of like, oh yeah, that happens all the time. And it's like, okay, well, I know my call isn't expected. I told you I'd be a minute. Because you said that you're experiencing this and you're hiring, or you've downloaded this specific ebook or whatever it is, I'm confident it'd be a good use of time to explore this further. So we're shifting to that model, and we're experimenting with it and see if that works, but it's going to reduce the time on the calls. And hopefully what I'm expecting is it will reduce this prospecting research fruitful that doesn't lead to a booked meeting. But that's kind of like, I'm testing a hunch to see if it works, right?
Yeah, and then you'll have the data to back up whether or not your hunch is correct.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and
go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say, sort of to bring that full circle to what we were saying about before, you're focusing on the prospect, right? On the buyer. So you have your SDRs having 10-minute conversations. If you don't think about the prospect, that's great. That's awesome. But I think it was really smart of you to think like there's someone on the other end of that phone. And you're right. They're taking their kid to work or kid to school. They're walking their dog. Not on take your kid to work day, I guess. But right, there's someone there and you want to make the best use of their time while also making it a good scenario for the business strategy, right? To set up the discovery call instead of just ambushing them with it accidentally, essentially. So I just wanted to point that out and just commend you on that, recognizing that was the problem instead of it being like, yay, 10-minute calls,
Yeah, well, because that could easily, and my reps are incredible. They're able to keep someone on the phone for 10 minutes of a prospect. Like
Right.
that's all. A lot of them are ready to become AEs, and like it's awesome that they can talk for that long with our prospects who it's not a scheduled call, right? So they're doing incredible work there, but it's like, ooh, if we make this one tweak, I wonder what the outcome will be, and it might not be a positive outcome, but my hunch is that it will be. And I noticed too, at the end of those calls, they're asking they're like, oh, like, send me some information. And it seemed like a genuine, sounds like a genuine, send me some information. Like, this is interesting, but I got to run. Send me some more information about this and we can talk later. And so I'm thinking that if they ask that earlier in the call, and we've got this, what we use it's called moments, but we've got a reminder now at 3 minutes and 30 seconds into the call to hey, would this be a good use of time to continue the conversation? So it's just like that little plug reminder in there for them to ask for the meeting if that's the case.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. And as we wrap up, I want to answer the main question, because you just mentioned something that made me think of it again, but like the viability of the SDR model, why you should want to have a well-trained group of SDRs within your organization. When we talked pre-show, one of the biggest things that you mentioned as to sort of a benefit of that function is you have a bench of SDRs who are ready to become account executives rather than trying to source AEs cold to join your organization. Obviously, a lot of organizations that have closing reps and sort of work full cycle would love to benefit from a well-run SDR organization, even better when they already have that internal knowledge and ability to sort of speak towards the value of your product. So that's just one reason why you should invest in your SDR team, have an enablement function, really train them up well. What are some other reasons where, if you're an organization that's like toying with the idea of like, do I even bother with SDRs? Do I sink the time and resources into training this team? They're just going to leave anyways. Like, how would you respond to something like that?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. So the way I would respond to it, sorry, my earbuds might die in a second, is that if you aren't going to invest in them, then don't have an SDR team. But there's so much value in having them there to build the pipeline. And our team is proof that you can do it. We've doubled the amount of pipeline month over month since July with the same amount of reps. Just making a few small tweaks and like coaching and training, they're incredible. And we've got a ton of support from like our RevOps team and from marketing, and it's leading to qualified good pipeline. And so I think that like there's tremendous value to be had. Like you have to look at the unit economics of it and decide that, it's not just like, okay, cool, you should definitely have an SDR team. Like, no, if you have, you should have the resources to pour into them, ensure that they're going to be, not ensure, because you can't ensure that they'll be successful, but you need to like prepare them to be successful, give them the resources, the tools, the coaching, the training that's needed to get the job done. And the reward is absolutely worth it in pipeline, which is immediate. Well, it depends on how quickly they ramp, but pretty immediate. And then hopefully they'll want to grow into an AE or in customer success or another revenue function within your company, and give tremendous value in context to your buyers. They, like you were saying, they ramp more quickly. And also too, it's like since they've graduated into this AE role, like they're proven that they can they've probably had thousands of conversations with your buyers. Like, how valuable is that to have had somebody on the front lines, building your pipeline, sharing their expertise, what they've learned from those conversations, sharing those calls, because you've taken AE off. I don't mean to say like off the street, but you've taken an AE that hasn't that's proven themselves, right, in an interview process over however long, in a couple of conversations. And it's like, no, this SDR, they've hustled, they've had one of the most difficult jobs in the company, they've seen success, they've talked to your buyers, they're passionate about it because they want to stay at your company and graduate into an AE role. That's huge. Like, these people, like, these reps, and they've got something to prove too, for the most part, right? Because they're hungry and they're wanting to be successful, versus another AE, which could be successful too, and hopefully they are. But I always just root for the SDRs who matriculate into the AE role.
Love it. Awesome. Well, hey, Maria, thanks so much for being here with us today. Just wanted to ask if you had like one thing to pull away from this conversation, like one major takeaway for anyone listening, what would that be and why?
Okay. That's a tough one. I think
we covered a lot.
We covered a lot, but I would say that number one, it's worth it to prepare your SDR team to deliver a really great buying experience to your prospects. And even though, like, if they're new to their career, inexperienced, like, you can provide the framework and the tools and the coaching for them to be tremendously valuable. And so, yeah, that would be my one takeaway. Get them focused on your prospects and not your product. That's it.
I love that. That's a great clip right there. Focus on the prospects, not the product. Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Maria, for being here. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about what you're doing, what Revenue.io is doing, how can they do that?
You can come to our website at Revenue.io and go into the chat. Sometimes I'm on the chat, and you could get a conversation with me.
Oh, we lost the headphones. Please hold.
The headphones officially died.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Now you're good again.
Or on LinkedIn through Messenger. I accept every connection request. So you can definitely find me there too.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks again for being here. Remember, listener, to subscribe, to unsubscribe, get more tips and insights like this into your inbox. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Maria.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks for watching this episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. If you want less of those nasty unsubscribe emails in your inbox, go ahead and check out some of the content we have to the left, and make sure that you subscribe to Unsubscribe to keep your SDR team in tip-top shape.